Alright, what's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about a strategy, and this is kind of more of like a thinking strategy and a mindset strategy towards making decisions and how you evaluate most things in life, and that's what I'm calling a continuum-based thinking strategy or approach, whatever we want to call it. And the reason why I'm making this and kind of talking about this is something that I've seen a lot, especially over the last year and a half, is we become very polarized in a lot of subjects, right? With, especially with all the shit with politics and vaccines and all the other bullshit but this is, as always, trying to keep this very focused on you guys for health. And this is a good concept to kind of think about with everything that I already talk about, because when we think about these very binary decisions that a lot of us make by something being right or something being wrong or something being good or something being bad or the yes or the no, it tends to, when we think in this binary lens, it tends to make us very close-minded to other possibilities, right? So when we say something is bad, we then kind of just mentally close the door on maybe other the good kind of scenarios or situations built around that. And this kind of evolved actually with a conversation I was doing with a remote client this week when he asked me, what would be good foods for me to eat and what would be bad foods for me to eat or avoid, I'm sorry. And I told him, I was like, one thing I want you to remember is I don't want you to think in this lens of something being good versus bad, which is kind of how I landed on this. And this is something that I call the continuum-based model, which is thinking about everything and decision that you make in life kind of being on this continuum scale. And it's very dynamic, meaning it can move forward, it can move backwards, it can idle in place and stay neutral. But getting you out of the closed-minded approach of making decisions based off these kind of binary choices is a really great way to kind of open your mind to seeing other possibilities, but more importantly, getting you out of this mindset of something being bad for you or something being good for you, because even good things have bad things and bad things have good things, right? There's a lot to unpack when you think about things in a very open-minded approach. So I'm going to kind of start with the relationship with food and nutrition, because obviously that's where this kind of whole thing evolved for me this week. And, when you're thinking about foods and you're kind of trying to place this into this continuum-based theory, think about this as being something that there's less versus more, right? So yes, you might be less on the very bottom side of the continuum, and you might have something being more of on the other side of the continuum. And obviously with all things in progress in life, we're trying to work our way to the better side of the continuum, right? So when we think about foods, one of his things he was talking about is he likes to eat out a lot. He has a sweet tooth. And, obviously with sweets, a lot of us would like to put things like sweets in a camp of being bad, right? Now, if we were to approach this strictly from a health standpoint and just be in the perfect world, then yes, of course, I would say that yes, the goal would be to avoid sweets or processed refined foods, sugars and carbohydrates or things like that. But we need to be realistic enough to understand that that's not going to happen all the time. And when you make this kind of decision in your head that something is a bad food or something is a bad choice, when you do have that or you do slip, it looks like you failed, right? And this is where kind of a lot of the wrong kind of approach mindset-wise with a lot of decisions that we're making with our health, really, that's where we get in trouble, right? It's because we're putting them in kind of two different camps in two different places. Versus it being something that we want to look at as being less of, right? So if I were to say something for me, and the relationship that I gave to him, the story I gave him is alcohol has always been the thing that I looked at that I'm trying to have less of. Not that I'm an alcoholic or have a problem with it, but it's the thing that I probably would look at in my diet being the thing that I would deem as being something that most people would call bad for their health or bad for their results and their goals that they have for themselves. But I try to choose the lens of thinking that, okay, this is something I want less of, and we want to be able to moderate most of these choices. So when you think about food, you want to think about foods being kind of less of foods and more of foods, right? And this can almost be still within this kind of same theory of being, okay, well, does that still mean that it's good versus bad and just things are less bad versus the other and these are better foods than the other? And it's yes and no, because I still want you to think about this continuum dynamic approach of it going left and right on where we're at with our choices. And you got to remember that they change. And this is why having this very open-minded, dynamic kind of mindset approach to most things that we do in life, it makes it easier for us to adapt and maneuver and go forward with all these decisions. And most importantly, it doesn't really put you in a place of looking like when you do slip and you do something that's bad, or you do something that's wrong, or you do something that's, whatever against the kind of the narrative. It makes it seem like you're failing in those situations when it's really like, okay, like it's going to happen. We know those things are going to happen. So like, let's just try to put this stuff more on the kind of other side of the continuum of like, these are things we want less of, right? And these are things we want more of, right? And having that approach makes it a little bit easier to go, okay, because now it integrates some of this balance that we're trying to kind of, teach and coach you guys with. You guys have heard me a million times talk about balance. It's in the name of the podcast, that having balance is something that's dynamic, right? And this is where the entire pursuit of balance came for me, that balance is not something that's static. It's not a set point. It's something dynamic that changes all the time, right? And when you look at the coolest thing about being a human, and we talk about adaptation and our ability to evolve and adapt and kind of change stimulus and change all these things that we do all the time, is what makes us really cool as humans, right? So you need to have this mindset approach with everything you do, because there has to be an understanding that adaptation and that constant, evolving and the constant that we're doing all the time, that's part of the process, right? So instead of us looking at like, well, this is the way I eat, this is the way I train, this is the way I live, this is the way I do everything, because in the truth of all of that, for me personally, like my training changes over the year, my nutrition changes over the year. My stress levels change throughout the year. My work, schedule changes throughout the year. So like that needs to be in this constant adaptation as well. So getting you out of this very closed-minded binary lens is probably one of the greatest ways to constantly be in this level of adaptation, right? Because I think a lot of growth really exists inside of this open-minded approach with everything. And this is why you guys hear me talk about being open-minded and staying present and staying transparent with everything, because it makes it easier to constantly evolve and constantly adapt to all these things that you're doing, versus it being like, well, that's bad for me, or this is wrong, or this is not right for what I'm looking for. And really kind of taking a step back with those things, right? So think about that with everything that you do with your health, and especially with your training, and especially with your nutrition, because those things are constantly evolving. In previous podcasts, I've talked about a very cyclical approach to training and a very cyclical approach to nutrition, meaning that there shouldn't be this kind of constant stimulus throughout the year, that we want to have some variety to change up the stimulus, so we can obviously change up the response and change the result, or keep the results coming in a sense as well. Because when you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, is like, that's where a lot of boredom sits for people, and this is why a lot of people quit. Or more importantly, this is where a lot of plateaus are hit with our training, because you're doing the same thing and you're expecting your body to have a different result. And we've all heard that famous quote before. So understanding that there has to be some change in stimulus and change in kind of environment, change in structure, over the course of months and weeks and years, is something that you already need to be prepared for, right? So, and that's one thing I was kind of having the conversation with this week, was just more nutrition, but it really kind of got me to think a lot about what's been going on in just life in general, because like something that I personally, my personal opinion with a lot of like politics and diets, or even religion for some people, it tends to be very, very closed-minded approach, and it tends to make us very polarized, right? And this is why we've seen such a split and such a polarization of so many different things in life, is because people are thinking in this very binary closed lens, versus trying to open their mind and think about everything being on a continuum of like, yes, there could be something that would be inherently bad for your lifestyle, but that doesn't mean that it's bad for everybody, right? Like, what works for me and my choices for my diet, or for my training, or for my life views and morals and principles could be very, very, very different for somebody that is different than me, right? And that's the only thing that is the same with every human, is the fact that we all are different. So taking the opportunity and the time to try to stay open-minded with these things is something that's obviously requires practice. It requires repetition. And it's not easy, right? Like those are the things that I think a lot of us struggle as we think about like, well, it's much easier for us to just say that this is right or this is wrong, or yes or no, or good versus bad. And thinking on this kind of continuum-based approach is actually a lot harder, because it requires more work, and it requires you to actually try to look at every different perspective and everything that we do in life. Something that I've noticed even with my business from a management standpoint, and we see this with all conflicts and arguments or decision-making process, or when there's multiple people involved is the good old, saying that there is 3 sides to a story. And I deal with this a lot in management sometimes with, just bullshit at work. A lot of times it's just kind of bullshit stuff that we just need to talk about out loud as a team, or just get stuff out on the table. You see this with friends, you see this with relationships. I will have my side of the story, that person will have their side of the story, and an outside person might have a different point of view of like the entire story. So basically, like, there's 3 sides to that story. But when you choose to stay very close-minded, you only see what you see, and you choose to block out everything else. And I think this is what's creating so much polarization with everything that we have, with all these kind of issues that a lot of us are dealing with, and just in general with life and everything going on around us. It's the same kind of theory here, that we need to become more open-minded in order for us to actually see and feel and empathize and sympathize with the other person, but more importantly, to be able to see the other side of the story. Because when you open the lens and you choose not to look through this kind of little pee hole the whole time, and you open up kind of your sight to everything and you listen, this is where you really have a strong advantage, and this is where a lot of growth comes from. And a lot of things that I talk about with kind of communication and influence and sales, like a lot of, we do sales training here once a week with the team, and something that I talk about all the time is when you think about communication and you think about having influence, both in marketing and both in sales, you need to remember that, like, good communicators are not good talkers. They're actually great listeners. Right? And being able to listen and ask the right questions and really get as much information as you can from that person first, then makes it easier to conversate with that person, because then you hear their story first. You have time to process it. Hopefully you're asking the right questions to get the right information out, and really to try to find a middle ground with everything, right? So it doesn't matter if I'm doing sales or I'm doing a marketing campaign or if I'm having a discussion or argument or conversation with somebody. Like, there needs to be an even playing field on both of us, and the only way that's created is by listening first, right? Is by staying open-minded with what we do and understanding their pain points and understanding their reasoning behind what they're doing, and hopefully trying to kind of really peel the onion back and understanding why. So this way, when you go to explain your story, you can do the exact same thing, and then we can start to find this middle ground, right? Because then we can we can start to really find this place where both of us can become in a place of communication where the frequency becomes the same, right? Versus when you're just kind of, there's a lot of people that we hear that are just waiting to respond versus listening to understand. And this is why we have such a big communication gap with so many different things again. When you listen to understand, you're actually really, really taking the time to understand where they're coming from and understand what they're saying and understand their pain points and really listen to those whys again, like I was saying. When you're only listening to respond, and it's very easy to tell that in a conversation with somebody because they're immediately just like cutting you off. They want to say something because they just have their information in their head and that's all they see. Now, the problem with this, once again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record over this podcast with this subject, is when you're only waiting to respond and you're only just kind of waiting to discuss your side of the story, you've closed off the idea and the possibility that there could be another way. There could be another answer, right? And this, once again, is creating more polarization in a lot of subjects that we talk about, right? And this is why I think, politics is such a sensitive subject for people. Diet advocates, this is always one of my favorite things to see in this space that I work in, is like a lot of, vegan people will talk crap about carnivore, and carnivore will talk crap about vegans, and paleo's this, and keto's this, and intermittent fasting this, and it's like they're basically choosing to put themselves in these camps that what we do is the best way to do it, and there is no other way to do it. Right? And that's not the truth, right? Like, the reason why it's not true is because every single person is different, and at an individual level, different things work for different people, right? And you have your choices, you have your rights, and you have your beliefs. That is encouraged, and that is wanted, and that is something that we should be trying to promote, versus trying to promote that what I do is the best way, right? And something that I'm going to talk about with my team today in the team meeting, and something that I really want to build a company around, is this idea that a platform can be very open-minded, right? And it can be, I don't know what the word would be for this, but like the idea that we're constantly evolving and trying to really set the standard a little bit higher than where we were yesterday, right? And building on top of what we're doing and taking other people's information, right? Like, I really, one of the things that I really like to study is successful people, successful businesses, things that work really well, and obviously the opposite too, things that failed and the reason why people, have failed in certain positions. And I think the best people in the world, something that I've really learned, is they're able to take information from people that have already done it through practice, and take it and twist it and add their own flavor on it and try to make it better than what it was previously. But if something works, the cool thing is he's already given us facts that there's evidence that this thing has worked. And if something's failed, we have evidence that maybe this is something that doesn't work. Doesn't mean it's binary that never works again and this will always work forever, but it gives us information, right? And something with my company that I want to do, and our team more importantly, is I want to have this platform where we can constantly be taking different professionals and different theories and different concepts and always be constantly practicing them and, putting them into play and optimizing. So when you're in this constant level of optimization, we don't really make the decision that where we're at is good, right? For me, I'm very grateful for that I have a company that is successful, that we have a good team, that we're able to kind of, get through a pandemic and still be able to grow and have one of our better years. These are all things that I'm obviously very grateful for, but I still choose to go, okay, well, there's still so many things that we can make better and we can constantly be optimizing. And that's kind of the concept that I'm coming back to, that staying open-minded and having everything on this continuum-based thinking strategy allows me to constantly be like, okay, we can continue to move this thing forward, right? Not where we're at idling at neutral works, because yes, it works, but can we make it better, right? Can it get worse? Can it get better? Once again, that's a continuum, right? So think about this with everything, right? How your training works, how your nutrition works, how your stress throughout the year works, how your sleep. One of the things I was just having another conversation with this week was something I was looking at. I've been tracking my sleep for over probably 2-3 years now in Oura Ring and Whoop, and I've noticed that in the winter months, my HRV, my heart rate variability, actually drops during the winter. Right, and something that I noticed was okay, am I more stressed in the winter? Is that why it's dropping? Or maybe is it because there's less sun and I'm having some seasonal disorder, kind of because I am one of those people that really if you know me, I'm like a lizard. I need to be in the sun all the time to be happy. But these are all things, these are facts, but using this information to think about things in the macro and think about things in the long term allows me to make these adjustments, allows me to have this flexibility and this adaptation throughout the year. Right? Versus thinking in this very closed-minded way of thinking that what works today is going to work forever, right? And if it worked on March, it's going to work in December. And that's not the truth. Once again, it's always evolving, and so should you, right? But the only way you can evolve and you can adapt moving forward is by staying open-minded, taking a strategy that allows you to have flexibility built in, so you're always prepared for change, right? In my business, one thing that it can be very stressful for me sometimes, because I tend to always think about things in best case scenario versus worst case scenario, and having a worst case scenario mindset allows me to be prepared that okay, what if everyone quit today? What if 100 members decided to cancel the membership today? What if the government decided that they had to forcibly close me down today? Right? And it's not, the reason why I don't think it's something that we should be doing all the time is because it's getting you in this very pessimistic, what if? But the good news is allowing me to prepare, because I'm already throwing it out there, right? I'm already mentally going, okay, well, if worst case scenario actually does happen, what am I going to do to plan for that, right? I choose to try to stay as optimistic and grateful as I can with everything in life, but being in a position myself, owning a business, or being a manager if you are, or you're being a parent, or you're being a coach of any sort, you do need to have a lens that allows you to look at both sides all the time. Because if you're only looking at one singular thing, once again, you're looking through a very, very small hole, and you will become blind to a lot of the details and information, and choose selectively not to listen to these things because you think what you're currently doing is the only way to do it. And like I said, I don't think that's going to be the way for someone that wants to be successful and wants to have really a stress-free life or reduce stress in a certain way. And really getting us out of this polarized kind of environment that we've created. And I think a lot of this, unfortunately, is media-driven, politically driven, with some of the stuff that I talk about all the time with just, the pandemic and the vaccines and the politics. And that's one of the reasons why I choose not to talk about these things, because I don't really care about it. I'm not a political person for a reason. And I choose to kind of stay out of these closed-minded conversations. And when I look at, diet camps, or I look at politics, or I look at religion for people, or I look at certain things, it tends to be very closed-minded, and it's hard to have conversations with closed-minded people because they only see their way. And we all have our things that we tend to be a little bit more closed-minded to. And once again, coming back to this continuum, closed-minded versus open-minded, drawing a line in between and trying to find where you are inside of this continuum. We're always trying to work our way towards a more open-minded approach. We're always trying to work our way more towards this kind of a growth mindset versus the scarcity mindset. In this continuum, it's everything, right? So try to always picture you're a small little dot onside a continuum graph, and we have a left and we have a right side of this. You can work either direction, but choose to look at it in a lens that allows you to be dynamic, so that flexibility is already built in, and that mindset will make it much easier for you to make decisions. It'll make it much easier for you to adjust when things do happen, when worst case scenarios do show up, when best case scenarios do show up, whatever happens in your life. You have a mindset already built in, optimized for you to be able to make decisions and move quicker. Right. And one of the things in marketing and business that I tell the team a lot is you got to remember, speed wins 99 out of 100 times, right? Like for me and my company, it's like we sell weight loss, we sell health, we sell fitness, we sell strength, we sell accountability, we sell structure. Like that's what our business is. But the reason why liposuction can charge, 100 times more than we charge is because they can do it in an hour or two. Us takes months and years, right? So speed is the name of the game. And when you look at success in all areas of life, you need to have the ability to have that speed of transition, because a lot of people, when something bad does happen or something that goes against their narrative does happen, they shut down, and shutting down does nothing for you. So you want to have that ability and that flexibility built in. And this is why I love this approach, right? All right, guys. Well, I wanted to kind of make this one a little bit shorter today. Actually, I don't know how long I talk for, but I tend to talk long enough. I really appreciate a lot of the feedback. A lot of people, I know there's some family members, there's some friends, there's obviously a lot of members listening to this. I really appreciate the support. I love that you guys love the content. That's what makes this very easy for me to do. Share this with somebody, subscribe to it. I do these every Friday, where I try to. I think I've only missed one in the last 18 or 20 weeks, whatever it's been. Other than that, have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care.